In our last two sessions, dealing with the practice of spiritual life, we considered the four main indispensable conditions, namely the knowledge, the personal effort, the teacher, and the instrumentality of time. Before one takes to spiritual life, one is got to be awakened to it. If one is satisfied with the run of things as they go, one doesn't really think of spiritual life. One participates in the normal religious life as part of the social arrangements and nothing more. To enter into spiritual life, inner life, there has to be a certain awakening to the necessity of changing one's pattern of life, the need to change the wavelength of one's consciousness, to turn a new chapter. And this awakening that there is a higher reality than the apparent things that we pursue day to day, that behind all that changes and dies, there is something permanent, there is something eternal to which we have to aspire, and something of which we can realize and make a part of our life. This feeling comes either as a result of natural development. The past evolution has brought things to a head, and as a result of this slow natural growth, one begins to think of these things. It can also be as a result of the influence of a religion which speaks of the eternal, which speaks of divine love, which speaks of truth. It may influence an individual, or it may be one is attracted to a philosophy. There are so many presentations of approaches to truth, formulations of truth, which we call philosophy. Philosophy has different connotations in the East and in the West. In the West, an attempt to formulate one's ideas, speculations of what the eternal truth is, what the reality is, a statement of that, hypothesis, argument, conclusion. It is called philosophy, it is called metaphysics. It need not have anything to do with some perception, changing the character of one's life. One can sit and speculate, weave these systems of speculation, and they are philosophies. In the East, the word philosophy has got a different term. It is called a seeing, not thinking, but seeing. Each philosophy, each metaphysics is called a particular vision, particular seeing. a person has a certain great experience, a masterful experience, which changes his entire outlook, his style of living, and he presents that experience in terms of the intellect. And this presentation of a living experience in terms of the mind is called philosophy. And such a philosophy may attract somebody, and one may begin to take interest in spiritual life. It can be a slow illumination. One may understand, one may think, one may read, and a slow understanding develops, leading to the inevitable choice, a choice of truth. It can also be by a sudden leap or a shock. Something happens, some great experience takes place, some kind of shock comes and awakens one to the existence of another order of reality. It can also come about by pressure of outward circumstances or an inward necessity. The soul, the inner being, refuses to participate with joy in any of the day-to-day experiences. It sulks. It doesn't take interest in the normal petty rounds. It wants something more. Now this pressure from inside makes one search for something more satisfying, more lasting, and it turns towards the spiritual life. It may also be that one hears a single word, just a word spoken by somebody. It rings a bell. It evokes certain memories. And one starts. The classic instance is of a modern saint in India who became very famous as Ramana Maharshi. He passed away about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. He was made famous all over the world by Paul Brunton, who wrote his book Search into Secret India. Now this person was a very young student, and one day somebody spoke the word Arunachala. Arunachala is the name of a particular hill. There is a hill in South India which is considered by geologists to be the oldest hill on earth. Before the present configuration of the continents and oceans formed, there was a line of mountains, and a mountain similar to this mountain in South India has been discovered in South America, somewhere in the Andes. Now this mountain is named Arunachala, the Red Mountain. When somebody casually mentioned it, it caused a tremendous consternation, an agitation, a kind of revolution in the young boy, who immediately left his place without telling anyone, left a note for his brother saying that I am going in search of my father, and he disappeared. He walked and walked, had a little money, took the available transport, and arrived in that hill and shut himself in a cave for at least 11 years without talking. It is austerity. He wanted to find out the meaning of death, whether when one dies, one really dies completely, or whether something remains. So he went in a self-exploration and found that reality of the self, which does not die, which does not change. Now this person, that one word, Arunachala, it caused a complete reversal of his life movement. There are instances in the lives of many others where a single word acts as a springboard for flight into another dimension, or it may be a result of a long reflection. One considers number of alternative approaches to God, thinks, meditates, and after considerable reflection is led to choose one approach, one path which is in affinity with his past evolutionary development and with which he feels a certain familiarity. It can also be that one turns to spiritual life as a result of an example of one who has already trod the path. There are those who have walked the path. They stand as exemplars of the truth of that path, ready to help those who seek it. And such an example can very well turn number of people towards spiritual life. It can also be that by contact, one may not start with an interest in spiritual life, but coming into contact with one who lives that life, who believes in that life, by the daily influence of that person, one may make an entry into spiritual life. Thus, an awakening can take place in a number of ways. It can also take place as a result of some shock in life, some death, some accident, some danger. Immediately, one leaves the surface play of the senses and one withdraws or indraws to a level where there is this deeper strength. One thinks of God, one thinks of an inner source of help. In some way, that occasion is used by God to reach the message, to awaken the person, to change his pattern of life. Now, once one is awakened, it is only a beginning. To be awakened to spiritual life is a good beginning, a necessary beginning. But that is not everything. One has to consecrate oneself to the objective, to the goal entirely. A spiritual aim cannot be one of the many aims in life. We have the aims, aim of fulfillment in art, in literature, games, in aesthetics, so many different fields of life. Spirituality cannot be one such field occupying a part of the interest. It has to become the whole of life. The entire life must be permeated with the spiritual aspiration, with the desire to breathe the spirit into every activity of one's life. And for that, a complete and effective change is inevitable, necessary. One has to consecrate to God and only to God. God, not outside this world, but within this world, around us. God is not only within us, above us, but also around. So the consecration, the commitment has to be entire. Normally what happens? The mind accepts the truth, the philosophy, the teaching, the doctrine, and takes delight in thinking of it, in reflecting of it. But there it stops. The other activities of life go on in their old animal rounds. The heart goes on in its own way, becoming a center for turbid passions and desires, mixed emotions. The life activities pursue their old ego desire motives. The mental change of loyalty, of fixing a certain truth, does not necessarily change or make an impact on the movements of the heart or the life force, much less the body. The mind, the heart, the will, they all must accept, must be taught to accept that one idea and cast themselves in the mold of the chosen idea. The mind can have a capital idea, a great truth before it, but the heart must assent to it, must try to see that all its movements, emotions, feelings are consonant with that truth. Similarly, the will force, the willpower must accept to execute only those things which fall in line with the ideal that one has chosen. In other words, the entire life has to be organized around the truth that the mind accepts or the heart prefers. Man is a multiple being. There is a mind that goes on thinking, imposing its own ideas and thoughts on the rest of the being. The heart is often in conflict with what the mind wants. There is no synchronization between what the heart prefers and what the mind wants. Both the mind and the heart, they tyrannize over the body, forcing it to yield and respond to their mixed impulses. The body, the poor physical body, is not allowed to have its own say. This eternal conflict of man at war with himself has to be put an end to once one awakes to spiritual life. Because one has chosen a satisfying ideal, a truth, and each part of one's being has to be oriented, educated to cast itself into that mold. Now, there is a long space between the first turning of the mind and the full ascent of nature. It is a long, long preparation. depending upon our sincerity. We are, most of us, sincere in one part, but not sincere entirely. The heart is sincere, but the mind, for its own preferences, its own likes and dislikes, it will put different interpretations. The mind will always justify and give long reason why one should do what it prefers to do. The mind is a very unreliable guide. The heart, closer that it is to the seat of the soul, is more reliable, provided we take care to constantly purify the emotions of the heart, subject it to certain catharsis, that our movements, our emotions are not based upon self-interest, upon ego. When we can relentlessly, pitilessly examine ourselves during our moments of contemplation, meditation, and discover these movements which are intended to fulfill our ego interests, our personal demands, they are to be rejected. Sincerity has been defined as lifting up all the movements of one's being to the highest level of consciousness that is attained. In each one of us, there is a high point. That high point accepts, lives, or wants to live according to an ideal. Now, one has to labor to see that all the movements of one's life, physical, vital, psychological, emotional, mental, spiritual, all these are lifted up to that level. It takes a long time, but still that is what is called the culturing of the soul. Sincerity exacts a unification of the whole being around the chosen ideal, the chosen truth, so that that truth casts its stamp on the general life movement. How long this preparation takes depends upon our sincerity. Whether we choose the hard way or want to get more time, allow ourselves indulgently, there is no particular hurry, and we can make this decision a little later. In the meanwhile, let me satisfy my desires and these things. Whether we indulge ourselves or whether we are severe to ourselves and choose the hard path of progress and change, it is left to us. And the preparatory period, after accepting the necessity of spiritual life, can be long or short, depending upon that. There are some who try and find after a time that they are not equal to the demands made by the spiritual life. They still have desires, they still have insistences in lower nature which demand to be satisfied, and something in their will is lacking. The will is not prepared to back up the decision of the mind or the heart. There is a certain weakness, and they suspend the spiritual effort and turn back to the old ignorant round. The spiritual life, they say the spiritual effort, does not hold them for more time. And that is called a lapse from spiritual life. But even a lapse of this kind, when one finds that one is not equal to the situation, one is not able to make a change in one's life, change one's nature, that lapse also is not a waste. Every step gained is a gain. There is no going back. You stop there, and sometime later, maybe next birth or another birth, or later in the same birth, the evolutionary nature will take its further step. So nothing is ever lost in this venture. Though one may appear to have fallen from the spiritual path, there is really no fall. There is only a suspension. Nothing is ever wasted. In the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita of which I had spoken the other day, the disciple asks him, the Lord, what about those who sincerely try for liberation, for union with thyself, but for some reason or other they failed? Is it not that they have lost both this life and that? The Lord assures him, it is not so. No effort ever goes in vain. He says, those who apparently fall in this birth, them I choose and put them to birth in a more favorable environment, in the house of families who are clean, who are pure, who are wealthy, who are better circumstance, and give them a better and a happier start. That's the assurance given to the aspiring human soul, that there is a watchful providence always, helping, watching, encouraging the human effort. In our labor to change the texture of our life from top to toe, spiritual life, as I said, is not a segmented life. It is not as if like religious life, where we say we will go to church on Sundays, put on our best dress and go to Sundays, read a little prayer, and then take to other activities. A spiritual life has to form the background of all life. And when we want to do that, we find, to effect this what is called the wholesale conversion, we find two things against us. One is our own nature. Second, the entire environment. The whole world is organized on certain basis of ignorance, falsehood, and their brood of competition, rivalry, and so on. And when you want to change the pattern of your life, it presents a solid obstruction. The world may scoff. If the scoffing doesn't work, the world may obstruct. It will present obstacles at every point of the journey. And our own nature, we have got so many habits of which we are aware and not aware. We have got a long past behind us. And every habit that we have today is a result of our long past. Analyze each habit and you will find a complex web of past impressions. Now to change this trend of nature, habit of nature, is a challenge. And this difficulty of having to recognize the reality of the obstruction of one's nature and the greater obstruction placed by the environment led the ancients to easy and trenchant solutions. They said it is useless to try to change one's nature or to change the world. They will never change. Twist a dog's tail however you will. When you leave it again, it becomes crooked. So they said nature can't be changed. The world has been what it is for millenniums and will continue to be what it is. It is the way of wisdom to withdraw from the world, concentrate on your own will, and escape either into some paradise or into some peaceful beyond. But this solution, though it has appealed to large sections of humanity because of its easy access and because it is easy enough to reject, to bypass a problem, put off a problem, than to solve it. It is no more possible for us today in this century. Human development has come to a stage when we can't think of rejecting the world. The world is very much with us. Wherever we go, we carry this world with us. To go to a forest, to go to a hermitage, does not solve problems because we carry the whole cosmic load with us wherever we go. Our own nature, the environment in which we live, all those things continue with us. We have to take account of these things and set ourselves to the problem of changing our nature, and nature can be changed. If only we are sincere, nature can be changed. Only we have to establish a new center of vision and a new universe of activities. Each one has to create a new universe of activities from his own standpoint. The first step is to change the surface orientation to a deeper faith and vision. A faith which believes in a deeper reality. God, the divine, compassion, grace, which are not that apparent, but one must have that faith and the vision that these things can be established, can be organized in my life. And I can, to the extent that I am permitted, impose this little pattern which I establish in myself on the environment. One must have constantly a vision and a faith. The whole of life has to be woven around these two truths, and the willpower must be exercised to compel the lower being to pay homage to this deeper faith and vision. It is not enough that I have that faith here and that vision here. My nature of impulses, desires, emotions, that has to be compelled to fall in line with this new vision, with this faith. It has to follow. And that implies a complete surrender of all nature, with all its energies, energies of mind, energies of heart, life and body. Mental energies means thoughts, mental ideas, mental thoughts, conceptions, all of them have to base themselves and be in conformity with this new vision of God or divine consciousness. Similarly, the life energies, they must seek to express these truths and not be always busy with fulfilling my little desires, my little impulses to gain better of my neighbor. The physical body also has to be trained to engage itself in occupations, in activities that are in consonance with this new faith, with this new vision. Once, by sedulous discipline, coaxing our life energies, getting the consent of the mind, and culturing the heart in accepting this new situation, goes considerably ahead, life becomes a helper rather than an obstruction. Life no more obstructs, but becomes a field where you can experiment, where every contact in life can be made an occasion to test for oneself whether one is sincere, whether one really practices of what one believes. If one shuts oneself in a hermitage or a cottage, one can luxuriate in subjective experiences and live in a world, an imaginary world of his own, a world which bursts like a bubble at the first touch of reality. So, it is in the midst of life that we can test for ourselves how far what we believe, what we think we have attained is true. My peace of mind, my equanimity, equality of attitude, can it last if somebody insults me, if somebody abuses me in the course of my day-to-day life? Am I able to stand it without reaction? Or do I react as anybody else in the street would react? Give back if I have the strength, or swallow it and seethe in myself if I am weak. In either case, allow myself to be affected. Similarly, every occasion gives us an opportunity to decide whether I will function from the selfish point of my own interest or the general interest, the need and the requirement of another. Spirituality requires a constant ascertainment of one's sincerity, of one's readiness to practice what one preaches, to follow what one believes. Consider from this point of view, life becomes a field and an opportunity to grow and to test for ourselves how far we are sincere, how far we have to make up. There is a lacunae, and we have to benefit by it and try. From this point of view, it is a very good exercise for all sincere and serious seekers. At the end of the day, before one goes to bed, to look back all that has happened from morning. Ask oneself whether one has reacted to things and acted in situations in a manner that one would really approve. Has one functioned as a seeker, as a lover of God? Or has one functioned as a selfish individual of the world. Whether one has failed, whether one has acquitted oneself favorably. Now one has to look back, note where one has succeeded, where one has failed, and where one has failed, why one has failed. Now this self-scrutiny, self-education, self-correction can be a very important part of spiritual life. And the next day, when one looks back again, one has to see whether the decision made the previous night has been carried out or whether one has failed to do it. This constant examination of oneself, one may cheat the world for a while, but one can't cheat oneself. One has to be honest to oneself. At least the thoughts, the emotions, the feelings are transparent to oneself. And one can see without feeling very bad about it. Objectively one can see what are those moments which need to be eliminated. It helps us in this exercise to know that all that we consider unspiritual, mean, ugly, they are not necessarily products of our own consciousness. There are many which are in the universal atmosphere and they are on the move, getting into people, trying to find expression. If those people don't give expression or are normally not used to give expression, they go back. So it is wise not to be also too self-condemnatory in these exercises. There are many. Who go to the extreme, other extreme, and go on finding fault with themselves. Every little thing, they go on criticizing themselves, and the result is they lose complete confidence in themselves. This is an extreme case, again, of self-indulgence. There is something in the being which wants to condemn itself. It takes a secret delight, what is called the tamasic egoism. There is an ego in each person which is most ignorant, gross, which takes delight in saying that I am useless, I am no good, I can't do anything. And it goes on justifying itself. Now this is a thing to be avoided. Relevant to the point that I was making, I might draw your attention to the fact that in spiritual life there is such a thing as called, or what they call in the Veda, and I believe in occult traditions of all over the world, censors. Providence arranges that to each seeker there is a censor. When you feel self-satisfied, you think you have achieved and you have done things. Something points out to you, no, you have yet to complete this thing. You have not yet done. It points out. Now this agent in the subtle atmosphere around a seeker, pointing out the deficiencies, pointing out where one has still to make up, it has a role and a given role, assigned role. In the old Vedic tradition, it has been picturized that unless these censors give the password you can't go cross into the next realm of consciousness. You have to fulfill the requirements, conditions of evolution in one sphere fully before one is allowed to cross into the next sphere. So there are various dialogues and colloquies between the rishis and the censors, asking the password to be given. Now, in each one of us who is sincere in spiritual progress, in correcting oneself, making progress, this element of the censor is active, pointing to us if we are sincere, that this is the thing you have yet to do. If we listen, it thrives. If we try to justify ourselves as most ignorant people do, that voice will not assert itself too long. Now, what happens in the case of some? These censors, they exceed that brief. Instead of pointing out real deficiencies, they take it upon themselves to break your morale, always breaking your confidence, making you obsessed with your weaknesses, difficulties, failures, so that the whole world becomes dark and black. You don't see, you are always full of your own deficiencies and difficulties. This is a thing that has to be avoided. A certain balance has to be retained. We shall not give the censor an opportunity to exceed his brief, confuse us, and break our morale. We have to exercise our discrimination. Know that a full perfection can come only at an end. Complete truth, complete perfection is an end product of a process. It never comes in the middle. So one has only to approximate to certain truths, approximate to certain ideas or ideals of perfection. And a few failures, a few drawbacks do not matter that much. It is more important to keep a bright outlook, a cheerful disposition, and a confident spirit than one of timidity, fear, self-condemnation. These are things that are to be avoided by every spiritual seeker. I think we'll break up now and we'll meet after. Once we turn to self-observation as a part of our spiritual culturing, we discover a great complexity in our being. We find that we are not as simple as we take ourselves to be. For instance, my mind, when I observe it, I find that is not one mind, but there are many minds, many layers of my mind. Each one of it is involved in a different process. I have a mind which I may call my reasoning mind, which reasons on the basis of data that the senses bring before it. And this reasoning can be turned either way. I have also what is called an emotional mind, a mind which doesn't think objectively, doesn't consider the pros and cons on its own merits, but as influenced by the emotions with which it is quoted. There is a part of our mind which is always involved, touched by certain emotions, preponderant emotions, and to that extent, the activity of that mind is colored and also vitiated by the emotions. There is also what I may call a desire mind, a part of my mind which is completely at the service of desire, justifying a desire, finding out ways and means of fulfilling the desire, anticipating difficulties in the fulfillment of the desire and so on. It will never go outside the purview of that desire. This is the desire mind. And there is a mind which is so much identified with the body, the physical body. The body's needs, its comforts, its nourishment, its creature needs, that it doesn't think of anything else. It is entirely concerned with the bodily life. It is called the physical mind. Similarly, in each part of us, we have many personalities. As many personalities as the parts of our being. And each part again has its subsidiary personalities. So man is really a field for a complex of various personalities. Not just good and bad, Jekyll and Hyde, as they speak, but many more. And this problem of the existence of a number of personalities in oneself, different parts of being, not always in harmony, but in conflict, each pulling its own way, creates a very baffling situation for the seeker. To complicate matters, we discover that we are not alone. We live in a world where there are other people. Even if we shut ourselves from others, there are invisible windows through which other people can enter into our lives. Our thoughts, our feelings are so much caused, influenced, propelled by other minds, other hearts, that we can never be sure that what is ours and what is not ours. That we live in a world where there are so many others and we are a part of it, is one aspect of the situation which is again baffling to the seeker, emphasizing the complexity of the problem. It does not admit of a single trenchant solution. One has to develop an integral outlook, taking things all in a broad manner and recognizing that one is part of a whole, and oneself also is not of one piece but consists of many layers of consciousness, many levels of being. But there is a point of centration. There is hope, because despite all the complexity in the being of man, there is one center, a center of light, which is intended to be used as the point of centralization. All the movements, all the diverse complexities can be reconciled, can be governed and brought into a certain pattern from this standpoint, or the center of the being called either the psychic being or the soul. It is a center which is independent of the complex of nature. The mind, the heart, the life forces, the physical body, they are all held together by this point of light, this center. And this is a growing entity. The soul is a developing and a growing entity. Man thinks of spiritual life, awakes to the necessity of spiritual life only when the soul has developed, done certain grades, and come to a certain point of maturity, when from being just a spark, it has developed into a flame. From being just an entity, it has become a being, a conscious divine being, insisting upon making itself felt. It is because the soul is awake and it feels that the time has come for it to join the parent fire, to join the parent Godhead, that it puts out thoughts, feelings, which filter through the various levels of ignorance into the mind as aspiring thoughts, as beautiful emotions, as elevating feelings. The origin of all these is from here. And it may appear as if some outer object has awakened, has caused these fine thoughts, fine emotions. Actually, they become occasions, stimuli for the soul to awake and to put out its influence. And the soul makes itself felt first through influence, not through any concrete experiences as of voice or of light, but through influence. When the soul is awake, when the inner being is looking forward, one feels a strange sense of purity, a peace in the mind, an uncaused sense of happiness. This happiness has an element of sweetness, not of excitement, not of a thrill, but a cool sense of sweetness, slowly spreading, making everything look sweet, making everything look fine. And there is an imperceptible sense of purity, a purity which gets offended at a slightest movement of ugliness, falsehood, anything undivine, unspiritual. Maybe such things last for a while, for a few minutes, but the direction is made up. In the life of each person, when such moments come, it is an indication that the being is ready, The outer being has to turn inward, make peace with the soul, suspend its peregrinations outside, and collaborate with the inner being. And this influence of the inner being, the emerging being, the soul, the awakened soul, the influence casts itself in the mind in the form of thoughts, ideas, which are not related to one's selfish interests. As if one does not exist. Things which are of a universal nature. Things which pertain to something else. Things which expand the mental horizons, enlarge the range of emotions. The heart is filled with ebullitions of pure love. Love that insists on flowing out, not towards anyone. Love which goes to one person is not really love. Love is a universal movement. It just flows towards a human being, towards plants and animals, towards any object in life. There is a spontaneous flow, outflow of love. And the life energies, they also want to busy themselves with something which spreads the divine consciousness, not to fulfill my own desires, to work out my own individual scheme, but for a broader context. The body itself, when the soul is awake, feels light. The body has a sense of being a vehicle for a radiation of a divine energy. In India, we have a saying that the body is the temple of God. When one sits to adore, to worship, one imagines, conceives that this body is the abode, is the dwelling place, is the home of God. And mentally, one purifies all the environment, invokes the gods and the forces of peace and purity, and summons the God, summons the Godhead to take his station in this body. Every gesture, every movement reflects the mood that is called the mudra. Each gesture, which is a natural and a spontaneous expression of a mood, a state of mind, a state of being, without having to tell. The whole body participates. It is the language of the body in invoking the Godhead to come. That is the importance of the physical body. The body is not a snare, not something to be looked down upon, rejected as a product of sin. Sin and virtue are products of our mind. In God's creation, there is no such thing as sin. There is no sin at the level of animals. We don't blame a tiger for eating a deer, nor is there sin at the level of angels or gods. The conception of moral sin comes with the human mind. when it is still ignorant and searching for the truth of life. As the human mind does its rounds and goes beyond its level of reasoning, touches the intuitive levels, one has an intuitive perception of what is true and what is not true. The question of sin doesn't arise. If at all, it is a perspective of weakness and strength. You have an idea, you have a truth. You are unable to act according to it. That is your weakness. There is no moral turpitude as organized religions want us to believe, for which God is going to punish. God does not punish. Man punishes himself. God, His grace is there abundantly, flowing to prevent man from punishing himself. And if he insists, to help him to endure the consequences of his actions. Punishment does not come from outside, but from oneself. These are some of the ideas which we have to keep in mind when we begin this journey of the spirit. When we look straight to the problem of individual complexity and our involvement with the universe. I think we should proceed when we meet next. In the meanwhile, if there are any questions.
About this concept of punishment, do you believe in an immutable law of karma that every action produces an equal reaction?
Every action produces its reaction. Whether it is exactly mathematically equal or not is another matter. But it does produce reaction.
But then, even though we regard as weaknesses what we see as failures in ourselves and in others, that doesn't mean, or you wouldn't see that means that we should necessarily say, well, that's okay, it's just a weakness, don't worry about it. I mean, we should still recognize that it's wrong, shouldn't we?
But a weakness is something to be corrected. A weakness is not something to be always tolerated. You recognize the weakness.
Because we do see a lot of things going on that are very painful to other people around.
Yes, to blame others and to condemn others is not a highly spiritual attitude. One should reach whatever help one can to others, to awaken them to the state of things and to help them to correct themselves if one can. But just to censure them, find fault with them, preen oneself on one's virtue and look down upon others, that is absolutely unspiritual. One has to be understanding and constructive. Condemnation. In each one of us, there is a positive side. When we tend to condemn ourselves too much and lose confidence in ourselves, what we should do is to emphasize the positive side, the good side of us, and encourage that to spread, to devalue the exaggerations of the wrong side. By emphasizing the positive elements, you steal the thunder of the negative elements. We have to extend the area of our positive elements, positive side.